Unfair.
Invisible.
Horrifying.
Obscene. Cruel.
Loss of dignity.
Death.
Children.
Illegal.
Exploitation.
Appalling.
Inhuman.
Harrowing reality.
So, okay, I'm gonna try to give you the not too long version of the story. I come from a mixed race. So my mom is Tunisian, was Tunisian. My dad is Syrian Palestinian. I was born and raised in Dubai, and I only spoke English and Arabic. And then after finishing my high school, I moved to Tunisia to study at the university. And our educational system was and is still until today all in French. So I couldn't really succeed in my, field of interest. I wanted to be a biologist, but I couldn't study in French. So I started looking for scholarships abroad. And I looked into England and I found a scholarship, but I also needed an extra source of income. So at the age of 18, there's not much you can do. So I found babysitting websites. And then these were babysitting websites. I put my CV and I started receiving offers from families who turned out to not be families. It turned out to be like a trafficking network, because when I insisted on talking to them, the families, to see their kids, to see the parents, see the room where I'm going to be staying, no one wanted to show me anything. And they kept saying they were so busy and that their lawyers will take care of everything. And they just asked me for my passport and my information, my address. And then when I insisted on one of them, they shared a stock photo that you get out of a frame when you go buy it at a store. So it had like measurements on it. So it did look fake. And that gave me a red flag. And I consider myself to be privileged because I come from an educated family. I had access to education. I had access to the internet. So I did some research on Google and, just like babysitting in Europe or like nannying in England. And that's how I came across the horrific realities of how a lot of young people are being trafficked, from Africa, from Asia into Europe and other locations. So I stayed in Tunisia, totally forgot about it, and then just went to my master's in Italy. And when I was in Italy, I met a Nigerian survivor who actually was trafficked the same way, but she actually ended up trafficked, and for 10 years. So when she told me her story, I felt like, wow, just everything in my life made sense. And I decided to dedicate my life for the fight against human trafficking, because it was a bit of piece of knowledge that saved me. And I know that knowledge is the most powerful tool we all can have. And that's why I'm very dedicated to raising awareness. And I'm very dedicated to focus on prevention, because why wait until the crime happens? We can really prevent so much suffering and pain in this world if we collectively bring the knowledge to everybody. So yeah, that's how I decided to go back to Tunisia. And I was doing my master's, so I decided to make my research focused on the trafficking in women in post-revolution Tunisia. And I analyzed the situation in Tunisia before and after the revolution, the institutions, the laws, the shelters, the services, what was missing, what was not missing, what's going on. And that's when I realized that human trafficking is a topic that was very, very underrepresented. Back then, the law was not even a law, it was just a bill of law. And there was no specialized organizations that were local fighting human trafficking. So I decided to take the lead. Since I had that piece of knowledge and the passion, I was like, I will just do it. And it's been a heck of a journey. It's been I just decided to do something and then I just had to follow up with it. But it's been a journey, and I'm very grateful to have done it so far. So the different forms of bonded labor differ from one culture to the other. And I know that, for example, in India, maybe I will learn even more from you guys. You could definitely tell me better about the forms of bonded labor there. But I know that it's a form that some people find themselves inherently born into it, and they carry it from one generation to the other. So it's really important for us to understand that, human trafficking and modern slavery and, all these concepts are all interconnected, and they do not happen in vacuum. So people find themselves in bonded labor and labor exploitation, forced labor, because they are vulnerable. And what leads to that vulnerability is that they do not have the services they need, the socioeconomic access, the education, the community, the network, the support, the opportunities others have. So we need to look back down to the root causes that leads people to be vulnerable, and especially young people. That's why I started Youth Against Slavery movement, because throughout my work, I was not focused on young people in the beginning, but then after I started traveling and learning from all around the world about how human trafficking is a topic that is, and this is some of the challenges we're talking about, is that it's a topic that a lot of people do not want to work on because they look at it or they perceive it as a complex issue. So they want to steer away from it. What leads to that complexity of the perception of it is also the way the information is put out there. For example, if you look at the TIP report, the Trafficking in Persons report that the US government puts out every year, the jargon, the language, it's not that accessible to everybody. I had to study this for years, and I still struggle sometimes. We all struggle when it comes to certain terminology, to certain jargons. So what we need to do is simplify it, make it clear, make it easy to understand for everybody, not just for those elitists or the researchers or the activists who are sitting in their, in their executive roles, but rather it should be a problem that everyone can relate to. How can we make this something everyone can relate to? How does this touch me as a person in my community? How can I identify the signs? And we also need to go back to the root causes, because I'm a very big believer in the intersectionality of justices. We cannot eliminate human trafficking and modern slavery if we do not work on all the intersections of justice issues related: climate, socioeconomic, gender, ability, disability, and political peace and more. Like, it's all connected, and the more layers of injustice you encounter in your life, the more you're going to be vulnerable to trafficking, and the more it's going to be easier for traffickers and for people to exploit you. So it's really a very it's our systems are exploitative. We live in a very exploitative world, and that is something we can deconstruct, and we can build a new way of doing things. So we're talking long-term, process. This is not something that's going to happen today, but with raising the awareness, with sharing that knowledge, with breaking it down to bits and pieces that we can all relate to, that's when we can actually get to our long-term transformation. I don't know if that answered your question, but I'm happy to elaborate. So putting the voices of those who are most affected and the vulnerable and the survivors and the victims, center and forward. Youth leadership is most important to me. Like, you guys, to me, you are leaders. You have to have your voice heard. You have to take the space, even if other leaders do not give you the space, because I started working on human trafficking when I was 24. I'm 34 now. It's been 10 years, but it's been a struggle. A lot of our traditional leaders do not believe that we have the capability or the ability or the capacity or the understanding of whatever issue we're working on, no matter what issue it is, but that is wrong. And we have to prove them wrong. And you can only prove them wrong by doing our best, by educating ourselves and working collaboratively in teams where we show that our leadership is meaningful and it's transformative and it's sticking to the, to the core values of justice that we all believe in. So you have to have persistency, you have to have resilience. That's what resilience comes like. That resilience is a big piece of it. When you're an activist, you can't just give up because someone shut the door in your face. You can't just give up because someone said, oh, I'm not going to listen to you because you're young or you don't have a voice, or I'm not going to give you the space. You have to take that space. You have to not give up, and you have to keep pushing. And the more you educate yourselves and educate your peers and create that connection, that movement, that's why it's a movement, because you want everybody to come in and you want to create cross coalition connections. You don't want to work just with anti-trafficking activists. You as an anti-trafficking activist, you have to work with everybody. So I have been working with educators, with lawyers, with media professionals. I trained everybody on human trafficking. You work with the law enforcement. You have to work with schools, with students, with basically service providers, with healthcare providers, because everybody has a piece of the knowledge and everybody has a piece of how to prevent the crime and how to give the service, because you cannot do it all on your own. It's a multifaceted crime that needs everybody to come in and join hands. So that's where we go with this. So just build coalitions, educate yourselves, educate others, and then build coalitions and keep growing the knowledge and the coalition that you have. Grassroots organization, you do not need to wait for the institutions to acknowledge you and acknowledge the problem, because they all have their certain agendas. They all have certain interests that serve them and their positions. So you need to organize on a grassroots level. And then the more you organize, the more you will be louder. And you can come up with policy recommendations. You can come up with suggestions that you can start circulating in your communities as solutions. And then you can keep taking it up and up and reach out to, the way I was working with embassies and missions in Tunisia, for example. I would go to the US embassy, I would go to the British, to the French, to the Netherlands, all of those missions, they have agendas to support human rights, and they need to work with grassroots organizers and grassroots organizations, because you're the ones who have the solutions for your problems, not the government. And the government cannot do everything. And that's why civil society exists, because we are there to cover the gaps the government cannot take care of. So you just have to keep organizing grassroots and taking that up. So you start bottom up, and then you go top bottom as well by working with those officials, requesting meetings with them, educating them. That's what I did in Tunisia. I would go, before the law passed, I was working with all the ministries around, and I was talking to all of them, and I was asking them, what do you know about human trafficking? And they would tell me, oh, Tunisia does not human trafficking. What are you talking about? And I was like, okay, well, let me educate you. This is what it looks like. Children in the streets who are begging are trafficked. Children in the streets who are selling stuff are trafficked. Child marriage, forced marriage, all these types of trafficking are forms of slavery that you are overlooking because you think it's okay and it's an acceptable cultural norm. Nothing is okay in that. There's nothing okay in exploitation, and we can all do better. So you just have to be strategic. Do your work on a grassroots, but invade these spaces with all these high officials. Talk to them, educate them, have workshops with them, attend their conferences, always raise the voice about human trafficking. As I told you, it's a topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, especially because there's also a divide. I don't know if you guys know about this, but this is one of the toughest things I've been struggling with. And I have been facing exclusion on my own because as a young activist, you go to gender justice spaces, climate justice spaces, social justice spaces, and people don't want to talk about human trafficking. They want to talk about everything else. And then you ask, what's going on? You dig deeper in the problem, and then you see that there's a divide between abolitionists who are against prostitution, and they call it prostitution. And then there's those who are pro-sex work. So the divide causes the whole topic of human trafficking and modern slavery to get excluded because people do not want to get into confrontation. So what we need to do is to continue to cultivate space to bridge the gap. How can we sit together and find mutual solutions that can serve everybody and not exclude you and exclude me and exclude the whole topic? So yeah, I think that's some of the problems. I mean, there's a huge lack of services. A lot of countries don't even have mechanisms. They don't even have local laws. They haven't even ratified the Palermo Protocol. So how are you going to be able to work with these survivors and victims if you don't even have, a national plan for it? If you don't have a law that regulates what are you going to do? What are the steps? Who's going to do the rescue, and then who's going to be giving the rehabilitation, and where are you going to take the victim? So I've seen how things transformed in Tunisia after the law passed. And we set up a national commission against human trafficking, and then they became the ones who were training the police officials so that they could take care of those rescue operations. And then they were working with some women's shelters and like other government building shelters that they were training so that they can put the victims there and then take them through the rehabilitation. But it's really everybody has to be on, like, involved. It's like all hands on deck mission. It's no one can work in isolation and expect that this problem would go away, so there has to be laws. The Palermo Protocol has to be ratified. You have to have a local law, and this local law has to, like, people have to learn it. Judges and lawyers, for example, do not know about these laws. Like in Tunisia, even the law has passed for a few years, and still judges would put children victim of sexual exploitation in jail because they did not know that a child is automatically a victim of human trafficking. You cannot call any child a child prostitute. There's no such thing. So that's something that only comes with laws, with regulations, and it only can happen if everybody is training on it. Going to have everybody training and learning. So there should be a lot of like education and capacity building and training on it. And yeah, just working with shelters. It's very important to have more shelters. And these shelters have to be trained. They have to be trained on human trafficking. They can't just be regular, any type of shelter and not know how to deal with the victims. So yeah, there has to be specialization. So the Middle East is known to be the biggest destination for forced labor. We know that Gulf countries, they have the kafala system, which is institutionalized slavery. These big skyscrapers and huge buildings and these like islands built in the water, it's all built on the blood and sweat of slaves. They bring migrant immigrants and they treat them very, very bad. And I've lived through that. I've experienced it. I did not experience it myself, but I've seen it. I've lived around them and I've seen how they're overworked in the heat. They even die from the heat. They're not protected in any way. They're basically treated like slaves. So that's the problem in the Gulf countries, is that they have money immunity. They have the petrodollar and they greenwash and they pinkwash their money by giving funds to global initiatives that are under the name fighting these issues, but they're not doing the real work by eliminating these practices, by putting regulations and laws. Patriarchy is a big issue when it comes to human trafficking. Patriarchy leads to all this exploitation because the control of males over females, the control of families is not going to stop until you shift the narrative, until you shift the norms, until you really deconstruct the ways we do our cultures and we do our communities. So that's why the Middle East is really bad when it comes to human trafficking, and also like a lot of child marriage, which is patriarchy. They connect it to the honor, the family's honor, and you guys understand that in India a lot. So the girl's honor, to protect the whole family, they pin it on the girl, and then the girl is the one who's married off, and then the girl is the one who's serving and losing her life. So it's really so many interconnected injustice issues. And that's why in YASM, I created the intersectional justice model. Our logo, I don't know if you've seen it. Our logo is the sun. And then I created the model that's, in the middle, there's human trafficking, and each of these sun rays is one of the justice issues. And if you want to work on human trafficking, you have to connect human trafficking to each one of these issues and tackle it. You have to connect it with the awareness, with the education, with the capacity building, with the prevention, with the prosecution. For example, prosecution is a very big problem because there's not enough trained people, there's not enough trained judges, even the lawyers, a lot because of the lack of laws, as you said. If these countries are not signing the ratifying the laws and signing the laws, they're not going to care. And in the end of the day, prosecution is very, very minimal when it comes to traffickers. With the big cases that we have, there's always a very minimal number of cases prosecuted and getting justice for the victims. So again, that goes back to raising awareness, massive awareness. And this cannot just be, that's my vision with YASM, is to create mass awareness, mass mobility, mass urgency around this issue. It's not something that we can isolate and work on from one country to the other. It has to be cross-continental. It has to be global, right? Definitely. I rescued a victim 2 years ago. Her name is Wanja. She's Kenyan, and she was trafficked. So she went to Saudi Arabia on I think it was like a domestic worker job or a babysitter. I don't remember exactly. I think it was a domestic worker. And then she realized that she was in a trafficking situation. They did not let her have her own freedom, and they confiscated her papers, and so she was trafficked. And then when I heard about it, because I work on this issue, I know who to contact. I know what are the routes of rescuing a victim. So I contacted the IOM, the regional office in Egypt, and then the regional office in Egypt contacted the embassy in the Kenyan embassy, I think in Saudi Arabia, and then that's how they facilitated the rescue. And now she is a global voice and leader, survivor leader, fighting against human trafficking. She's amazing. I'm always inspired by her and her work. So that's that's of course one of my stories that I really love. And I believe we all have that ability to rescue, to save lives and just be a light in someone's life. So so you can't do everything, right? You really have to specialize in something. And I realize that you guys have a passion for prevention, which is something I have the passion for, which is, for example, under YASM umbrella, we have the big accountability umbrella. And then under that, we have two big, how would I call them? Like two big axes. So prevention and partnerships. For me, that is the way I want to go about with my movement, because if I partner with local organizations and train them, give them the prevention tools, the capacity building, train them on how to work with local victims in their country, in their region, they can do that work. So it's a ripple effect. I don't have to do the rescue by myself, but I can train someone to do the rescue. So you really have to focus on what are you good at, what do you want to do, who do you want to work with, and you have to be strategic about it, because you cannot do everything. You cannot do everything. And I have to tell you, this is a topic that you can easily get burnt out working on, and I don't want you to burn out at the age of 15. It's not fun to be burnt out, because you will hate yourself, you will hate your life, you will hate your work, and that's not healthy. You want to be able to do this in a healthy way. So be a beacon in someone's life, be a candle, but be an electric candle, a rechargeable candle. Like, charge yourself. Make sure that your cup is full before you pour it out to others. Educate yourself. Find where is your interest. What are you so good at? what is your strength, what brings you joy in your work, or what are the missing links in that region? Like, for example, where are you guys based?
We're based out of Noida, in India. So
Okay.
it's yeah.
So I'm sure each region has a more prevalent type of trafficking, or the missing type of services, or so learn about that, look at what's missing, assess the gaps, do your own baseline study, comparing international documents and local efforts, and see what's missing, and then work on bridging that gap. You don't want to replicate efforts, you want to work with others. If someone is doing something that's similar to what you want to do, work with them. Don't replicate the efforts, because it's just a waste of your time and your effort, and it's not going to be as strategic. So work with people, find those gaps, and then build on it. But you really want to be specific. I don't know, did that answer the question? If I'm missing something, let me know.